Uno, dos, tres.
Let now.
Welcome everybody to Letter Now, a podcast where we nurture the handlettering masters of tomorrow, today. My name is Martina Flor. I'm a lettering artist, author, educator, and the host of the show. And today I have a great guest to talk about the ups and downs of a creative life. How can you deal with burnouts? How do you process through your downs as a creative? How do you do when inspiration abandons you? How not to let people's indifference get you? And to discuss all of this, I have Nim Ben Reuven with me. Nim is a freelance art director, custom lettering artist, video producer, and installation designer living in Brooklyn, New York. Hi, Ben. So happy to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm a little confused because I thought this was going to be a cryptocurrency investment seminar, and I paid a lot of money for this. And I hope at some point you're going to give me the tips and tricks to invest in the best cryptocurrency stocks. So I guess I'll keep my fingers crossed. But until then, we can definitely talk about whatever you like.
I'm sorry to disappoint. We didn't get any money anyways, if that makes you feel better.
Who did I pay then? I got to talk to my lawyers. They're right out there. So I will talk to them.
Definitely. You should get a new one.
So
I'm going to add Ben's website and social media handles to our show notes so that you can, if you don't know his work, you can get to know him and what he does. But Ben, I always like to ask my guests to introduce themselves. So how would you introduce yourself?
I would introduce myself as Nim rather than Ben. Ben is part of my last name, but it's very confusing. Oftentimes people think my name is Pim or Bim or Jim. And that's okay. I just get a little sad and then I crawl under my bed and cry for 2 hours. But this is fine. I would describe myself as an artist who's trying to find a way to develop my art through learning about sociology, learning about like cultural norms and deviations and all sorts of interesting things that are happening in the world, and intertwining the two of them in varying degrees of success and failure, and learning about it along the way.
I love it because I just thought that you were a lettering artist, but you're so much more than that.
That's what I'm trying to come off as, for sure. So
amazing. So Ben, I invited you to discuss today's topic because I have to say that I'm extremely inspired by your non-inspirational quotes. Nim posts quotes on his Instagram account like things like nothing is going to be fine, or you have ruined everything, and things like this won't last. I wouldn't say that he does it like every day, but when he does, you would definitely notice. So you can go check those on his Instagram account. I'm gonna add this to the show notes as well. And I love that skeptical approach to inspirational quotes, and I thought that you could have an interesting perspective around today's topic about, like, you know, how to navigate those downs, and especially the downs. Like the ups, we can all navigate the ups of a creative life, but when it comes to the downs, we all have a struggle and we all have trouble with that. But to be honest, you know, I'm thinking that it could also backfire, and this turned out to be like a totally depressing podcast episode. So let's see how it goes. So I will add Nim's Instagram account on the show notes so that you can get to know the quotes I'm talking about right now. And I want to kick off the conversation, Nim, by asking you what inspired you to do these quotes? Like where are they coming from actually? Like why did you started like creating or actually creating beautiful lettering to to illustrate these quotes?
it was a mix of two varying forces in my life that were coalescing at the same time. One of them was like a very traumatic event that I had just gone through, that I needed some form of expression to kind of meditate myself out of my own head in a way, kind of find some pathway to healing. And so that was where lettering started. I had already had some like interest in the form, but really wanted to explore the fine-tuned aspects of it and really like sit for hours and hours just like noodling around with letters. At the same time, I think that's when lettering became pretty popular on Instagram. And a few of my friends were like, you should do this, you should get on the gram, bro. And I was like, no, you don't want to do it. And then of course I did it 2 seconds later because I flip-flop with opinions and ideas constantly. And being on Instagram, I felt like there was a lot of weight on the side of motivational quotes. I think a lot of people can relate to this. Like lettering especially was almost exclusively a forum for positivity, to a point where it was oversaturated. And I felt like I wanted to provide some sort of sarcastic, sardonic balance the other way to kind of, get people a different sense of what can be done with lettering and also with one's emotions, to kind of like be okay with expressing the darker thoughts that we are going through rather than always having to be putting on that happy face with like your smile being pulled out by two hooks, to make sure that everybody on Instagram was always happy and always positive. It kind of made me a little queasy. And so doing these kind of nihilistic motivational quotes, things that I felt were motivational in that they allowed me to express my, the darker feelings, and then nihilistic also because a lot of the stuff that goes on in the world is kind of absurd. And I have that kind of edge to myself is, the none of this matters kind of side of things. But why not make it beautiful if it doesn't matter? So either way.
Amazing. I want to listen more of those stories later on as we go through the questions. But I think I totally relate to what you say. I think that this idea of positivity and also the fact that, the understanding that we need to be creating all the time and super or hyperactive all the time when it comes to creativity, it also makes really difficult to navigate the down moments, right? Because we don't see this as part of the process. And as we go through the questions, you will see that a lot of artists struggle with this. And actually, I asked my followers on Instagram a couple of days ago, I asked them, did you ever fall down and unmotivated and still didn't allow yourself to take a break? And a shocking 94% said yes. And the others 6% said no. And they're probably lying as well, right? So why do you think this is? Why do you think that I would assume that most of the people that are, or most of my following on Instagram are creatives, illustrators, designers, anyone working or doing something in the creative industries. So why do you think this is? Why do you think that we as creatives have this, put this pressure on ourselves?
Such a big question, but something I've been thinking about for a bunch of years now, and very relevant to how I look at my own work. I find a lot of blame. I'm going to put the blame on this. I'm going to point my fingers straight at the culture of hustling hard. That's something that I had huge difficulty kind of understanding and taking in. And then also once I understood what it meant, just the fact that it felt like it was driving people to a very unhealthy place of constant need to create, but also constant competition, constant me against the world, and I have to be working harder than everybody else, or person number 2 or 3 is going to get the jobs that are supposed to go to me who is hustling as hard as I can. But at the end of the day, it felt to me that this culture of hustling only benefits the corporations that essentially cause people to constantly create without thinking of their own well-being, without thinking about the rest that they need to take. So whether it's the job that you're at or this Instagram or Facebook or Dribbble or wherever a creative finds themselves trying to push their work out onto, it benefits the platform more so than the actual artist. There are rare moments where the artist will blow up, go viral because of the amount of work they put out that resonates with folks in some capacity. But for the most part, I would say the majority of people will never really benefit from constantly hustling and the people that will always benefit from it are the ones on top that are making the money off of this stuff, and not specifically us as creators.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, because it's like you're describing some sort of machine where, you know, like we need to feed with our creativity and our production or the things we create, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense, because I always, whenever I go on Instagram, I always have the feeling that everyone is doing something, you know, like people is being extremely extremely productive and doing something all the time and kind of putting work out there. And that's kind of an illusion, right? And that this illusion causes us to feel that when we are not creating something, we should be actually doing that, right? So it's not right not to be doing anything. And I also have, you know, I have this perception about not creating, or the moments where you're, you know, when you're taking a break or when you're not really inspired to create something. I always try to see this as the necessary step to actually create later on. So that, you know, I try to see this as part of life. Like, okay, you need the black to understand white. You need to, you know, have experienced sadness to realize when you're really happy, right? So you sort of need those moments where you're not creating or you're taking a break in order to later be creative or, you know, put some work out there, right?
Very good point. Yeah.
So as you know, Nim, this is a listener-driven show. So we are here to answer questions from our listeners, and we will go through your stories. And I want to hear all of them as we go through the questions, right? So, well, not all of them, just some of them. keep some for yourself. So we'll start with messages coming from social media. You can send us your questions through my Instagram stories on Martina Flor, or send your voice memos with questions and comments by simply going to martinaflor.com/voice message, or email your voice memo to podcast@martinaflor.com. Our first question is coming from Bea. How do you deal with burnouts? So through the experience of hosting the podcast, and I want to pass it to you later, Nim. Through the experience of hosting this podcast, I am starting to realize that burnout is a super common thing among creatives. I mentioned this in the beginning, and recently I recorded a podcast episode with Scott Biersack, and we found a possible terrible person, right? Okay, so we found we found a possible reason for it. And the reason may be that many of us, and I think this is brilliant, we're brilliant because we came to this understanding. And I want to tell you to see if it resonates with you. So we came to realize that many of us in the creative industries are here because this was initially our hobby. And we loved it so much and enjoyed it so much that we decided to turn it into our full-time job, which I think is totally fine. But the problem is that once our hobby becomes our job, we need to start treating it as a job and set some boundaries around it. So otherwise, burnout is really around the corner, because you just, you assume that you will be enjoying every minute of doing something that you initially liked doing. But this is also your job. It's something that also puts some pressure on you. So can you relate to this? And how do you go about burnouts when they happen, if they happen? And, how do you go about them so that Bea, who is asking this question around burnout, could get, perhaps some insights that can help her?
Yeah, this is a huge thing that I feel like more and more folks are becoming more aware of, especially in these creative industries, because there is so much pressure to constantly be working and producing. But also there becomes like a disconnect, I think, when folks start, you start out as a creative who feels like, oh, I've got this talent, I've got this skill, and I've got this passion for this thing that I'm working on. I can't wait to work in a studio or in industry or, for a company that really appreciates what I do, and then they set foot in these places. And I don't know too many people that work for like a corporation or any of those high level like pie in the sky brands that were so like buzzworthy for everybody, who don't feel really crappy at the end of the day in a lot of the days that they work there, because they're just doing menial tasks that don't exercise their brains. They're kind of like on the lowest rung of the ladder of who gets paid, who gets respected. Designers, creatives are often really, really low on the list. Like everybody has their say, and the designer has to kind of collapse their own passions and their own like opinions in a lot of these cases to make way for the marketing team, the strategy team, the insane CEO who comes off as some like genius, but is in fact a sociopath who doesn't know what they're talking about in a lot of ways. I'm not calling anybody out, but most tech companies are run by sociopaths. I'll just put that out there. Especially the tech companies that we think are the best places to work. Like, you're going to bleep these out and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And so without, when we start to work in these industries, we realize, we're working 13, 14, 15-hour days, and we don't have time to go back to like the personal projects that we thought we would be able to expand upon in a lot of these places. And so that's why I think a lot of folks are going freelance now. There's a little bit of backlash on that, on like the having to have that 9 to 5. And so the freelance thing helps a little bit to mitigate what kind of jobs you will allow yourself to be put into and what kind of pressures can come in and out of that place. But as far as like when that happens anyway, like if we are trying to constantly create and we're running into those mental blocks, we definitely don't give ourselves that space to breathe, that space to explore, because we feel like, if we spend too much time away from that, we'll become irrelevant. And all of a sudden people will stop noticing us. But I like to think of it in terms of like, if you think of your favorite musicians, more often than not, they will be putting out albums like once every 2 years, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, if that seems average. Especially bands that you really like tend to put out albums like so rarely that you're like, when they come out, you're like, oh my goodness, this is what I've been waiting for. Or maybe not. But to give yourself some slack in thinking that like there are other industries that need to take this time to produce beautiful, wonderful things or important things for themselves, like film, books, like all the other creative parts outside of design. They take their time, and they're allowed to take their time. And hopefully we can allow ourselves that as well. And that can trickle upwards into the industry when we become the creative directors or the CEOs of companies. That's my hope, is that eventually it will become a place where there will be time for research, time for self-awareness in between jobs and during jobs too.
Did you ever feel burnout?
I am heating up right now, super burnt. I definitely the last 2 years, when I think there was something happened in the world. I can't quite remember what it was, but it was weird. I don't know. Maybe it was just me. I felt a little sniffly.
I think it's just you.
Okay. Well, that's, case in point. I'm always thinking of terrible things happening just to me. But yeah, when there was a lot of pressure a couple of years back, when a lot of us were out of jobs, myself included. I wasn't being hired for anything for a bunch of months. And during that time, you're like, I got to make stuff. I got to really, make sure people know that I still exist. When in fact, I could have used that time to explore completely different aspects of the world, things that I may have not known I was interested in. Just like allow myself to take a look around me, essentially, and be like, okay, now it's time to build up those creative stores. Take a walk every day, or just read as many books or talk to as many people on Zoom as you can, to just learn about other people's experiences and not feel so much that our worth is directly correlated to what we're making and how many likes we're getting or who's hiring us. very difficult to do. I haven't mastered it yet, but if anybody has those answers, please call me up right now, and I'll pay you $5. Maybe
It's
if it works.
amazing. I think that the pandemic, if anything, for many of us has, triggered these questions actually to understand what is really important, what you really want to do, right? Of course, it has had a lot of negative impacts on a lot of other things, but if we can pick up on something about the pandemic, is that definitely it invited us to think or rethink the way we're doing things. Hopefully there will be some learnings after this. Maybe not. Maybe we come back to just, the world as it used to be. But I think some of the things you mentioned, like, reconnecting with people, taking your time, and understanding that you don't need to be productive all the time. Also, I remember that when the pandemic started, there was this also positivity around the pandemic, like, okay, use this time to learn something new, or use this time to like explore some creative endeavor. And it was like, well, maybe I don't want to, maybe I don't feel like doing this, maybe I have, I just want to be down and depressed about the, what's happening in the world, right? So let's move on to the next question, coming from Diana. What are the main reasons for your downs, and do you process and how do you process through those? Ben, a few months ago, and you actually said that as we started with the podcast, so I'm going to pick up on that right now. But a few months ago, we had a conversation on Clubhouse about a completely different topic, but I remember that you mentioned that you started doing lettering as a way to process a loss. And I would love to hear a little bit more about it, and if you're open to share with us, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything is a down sometimes. And back to your previous statement about the pandemic and this, take the opportunity to create and to learn something new. I don't remember any time where there was a force that was saying, like, take this opportunity to really grieve what is going on, to grieve the loss of, the sheer loss of life, the loss of lifestyle. And then also in the midst of that, we're going through 1,000,001, civil justice moments here in the United States, especially, where it's like, we're also in those moments told to like, you need to create something for this, rather than like take this moment to sit with what is happening and take it in and like listen to yourself, listen to the world around you. And I've definitely been, found myself in the opposite side of like, all right, I gotta do something to distract my mind from feeling this stuff. But with the lettering stuff that I started doing and like the meditative aspect of it, I think I went into it knowing that I was doing it to release some of that grief, to allow myself to like understand what it was that I was feeling and then calm myself down through it. So like whether it was the statement that I was saying with the lettering or the feeling that I was getting by just sitting by myself and lettering stuff, that was it felt like a release at times, but also it was like a very deep moment to connect with myself. And then also other people, strangers on the internet, when I put this stuff out for an audience to kind of react to, and seeing where people stood with it, where, if it resonated with folks, and also engaging with people was very important to me. And I'm trying to go back to the original question, but, the downs, I think, dealing with the downs and what like would bring me down. I mean, the world brings me down. I'm sure it brings everybody down. But also finding elements of beauty in that downtime, like, without that sadness, you can't really express your true joys or your true, like, expression of beauty without, feeling like the opposite of whatever it is that is the positive stuff. And so really like bringing it in and to be accepting of it and to be, acknowledge it as a very, very useful and beautiful trait to have those downs, I find is very important for me, and then might be as well for other folks who are in the creative industry, who are kind of pushed towards the, the big smiles, the light and fluffy stuff that is, kind of pushed on us through social media or the rest of the world. Does that answer anything?
Yeah, it's super interesting because by embracing this down moment, or like, yeah, by processing your loss, something actually beautiful came out on the other side. Like, if I understood right, like, you actually started doing something you really enjoy doing, which is lettering, and you explored a new creative aspect of your craft. So, I'm just actually putting this in terms of positivity, but actually embracing these negative moments or these down moments that I bet that in the precise moment were really deep for you and were at times, or most of the time, not enjoyable. But by embracing that, there was something coming down the road that was there for you, and it was discovering this new aspect of your creativity, right?
Yeah, there were definitely ups and downs to it. I mean, there's the element of being able to fully express oneself is very important. And then on the other hand, oftentimes this kind of stuff isn't well received in terms of, like, if you want to get jobs from what you do, like, it's not as noticeable. Something that I ran into when I first started doing it is people wanted to see a lot of process videos of how I worked. And that was incredibly difficult for me because it was a very personal space. And if I set up a camera for 3 hours, just watching myself erase and redraw, it would be embarrassing for me. And then also be kind of like opening myself up to a process that I felt like wasn't for other people. Like, the process was for me, the journey was for me, the end result I wanted to have for, an audience, but everything before then, I wanted to kind of hold on very tightly to be my own thing. And I didn't really want to, dilute it in a way by, like, having other elements enter, like, oh, is my hand moving correctly? Do I look good in this light? No, I don't. Oh my.
Yeah, exactly.
Et cetera.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel that, I don't want to sound like extremely positive again, but I find it so interesting how things that we perceive as negative in the moment can turn out to be have a positive impact in our lives. When I think of, when I moved to Germany back in 2010, I remember that I went through, like, I think a few months after I moved here, there was a very cold winter, and I spent a lot of time at home just doing my work. And I remember that at that time I was struggling also with the fact that I couldn't speak the language at all. Really, when I moved to Germany, I couldn't speak the language at all. So I had a lot of insecurities around it because I was a very opinionated person. I was very, like, expressive, and I came to a place where I couldn't express myself through words. So, and, like, looking back, and I had to, like, elaborate this for a TED Talk that I gave a couple of years ago. I feel that some of that came out in my work in a way that, now when I look back, I think, like, okay, my work is so, much of the work that I do is so decorative and so detailed and with a lot of flourishing and stuff. I feel that perhaps that experience had, or backfire in that sense. It had an impact in my work where I was, I won't keep anything when it comes to my work. When it comes to drawing, I would just put everything that I have to say on the piece, right? So I'm not sure if it makes sense, but what I'm trying to say is that oftentimes, or perhaps as an answer to the previous questions, is that oftentimes down moments can backfire, or down the road can show you a better place for you, right? So I think it's so important to embrace those and understand that they are part of the process. And, down the road, you can become a super great lettering artist like Nim Ben Reuven is, just because through that you process your loss, you process, like, a down moment that you're going through right now. So, Nim, we are moving on to our inspirational quote segment.
Ooh, nice.
I know this is a surprise for you. Nim, we all love quotes, and in this section we do our best to answer questions from our listeners with a quote. we later put these quotes on our show notes so that listeners can share them on social media. The truth is that, Nim, we just chat for a while, and if we happen to come up with a quote, we'll put it on the show notes. If you don't come up with the quote, don't worry. We will just sum it up in a nice way and make you sound really smart on our show notes. I'm a little bit afraid of the type of quotes that are gonna come out from this podcast because of they will be in the line of like life sucks or there's no way out or things like this, right? So here's the first question coming from Alba on Instagram. What do you do when you think that inspiration has abandoned you and feels that your work is not trendy? So I see those two questions here, Nim. One of them is about inspiration and what to do when you don't feel inspired. I think the other question has to do with, your work not being trendy. So for the first one, I just want to make a point that we often use inspiration in replacement of motivation. So inspiration luckily is something that happens sporadically because, being inspired all the time is the closest to suffering ADHD. So if you are inspired all the time, you have ideas constantly and that will drive you crazy. So yes. Motivation will be the force that, once you have that idea through inspiration, motivation will be like the force that helps you go through the work. So if you're inspired and you have that idea, motivation will help you make that happen, right? So Alba, good for you that you're not inspired all the time. So that's a good thing. But I'd like us to approach Alba's question or her second question around being trendy. And, Nim, what would you say to Alba that is struggling with the feeling that their work is not trendy enough?
Oh, that's great. I'm very happy that your work isn't trendy enough. I appreciate the elements of non-trendy work. Trendy is a very dangerous place to find oneself in because within 2-3 days it will be irrelevant, or just kind of appealing to the most basic of audiences. Not to call out any audience, but there is an aspect of trendy work that is trendy because it appeals to so many people. It doesn't offend anybody. It doesn't do anything beyond like, oh, okay, all right, that's interesting. I could get down with this, rather than like, this makes me think. Trendy stuff doesn't really make you think. So it's great to do trendy work because it gets you paid sometimes and gets you followings. But on the other hand, to chase that is it will override your own personal voice. And when your personal voice gets overridden, nobody knows what you've made is actually from you. And it's easily copyable. It's easily replaceable. A machine could do it, essentially. An algorithm could make the work. And so, this is also me. Yeah, I'm sure at times I've wanted to make work that trends, but I don't. So of course I find ways of the negative aspects shining through, be like, oh, I'm not going to do that because I'm too good for that. So take this with a grain of salt too. Like there's some people that really want to do trendy stuff and it appeals to them and it's fascinating. If that is still the case, I would try to find trends in other industries and other aspects of life other than, the art or design world. Read, books about world events, see movies, documentaries that are about things that you've never known about. And those might be trendy. Documentaries are super trendy. Podcasts are trendy. You might find inspiration through those types of trends rather than visual trends.
I love that idea. The idea of like using or trendy topics or take inspiration from trendy topics or actually react to trendy topics with your work. So I think that's a great idea to still be kind of current and, trendy. I think it also has to do with being current or something that is appealing right now. So I think that picking up, having a perspective on something that is happening right now is a way of being trendy without really copying what's being trendy, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, that definitely
Amazing.
narrows it down for me. Thank you.
Amazing. So the second question is actually a comment from Vera on Instagram. No, it's a question. Sorry. How not let people's indifference get to me? And I love this question because I've been thinking a lot lately about this. And I think what is Vera is actually talking about is validation. So what do I do when my work is not validated by other people? And there's a lot of ways to validate your work. But Nim, you might agree with me when I say that, unfortunately, right now, the most widely used validation method is social media. So when you post something on social media and it goes unseen, you start wondering, what does this mean? My work is not current enough, or it's not good enough, and I want to pass it to you because I know that I have like a lot of opinions around social media, and you express them very often and in a very interesting way. You will see when you get to see Nim's social media account, Instagram, you will see that he has some posts around this topic, and I know also, speaking about validation, Nim, I know that you have received awards, you have a big social media following, your work has been validated yes, your work has been, I'm laughing for those that are listening to the podcast, I'm laughing because I'm seeing Nim on video right now, and he's doing
I'm eating this up.
These fancy poses, so you have, as I said, you have received awards, you have a big social media following, your work has been validated in a number of ways, but nevertheless, you're very critical of those validation methods, right?
Yes.
What would you say to Vera that is finding it hard to deal with validation?
This is another big question that I don't know if we've come up with the right solution for, but I think knowing that it exists and knowing the forces that are in play is very important, like as a step to move towards countering these. And I think taking this all the way back to towards the beginning of this conversation, something about this idea of, the darker moments kind of feeding into our experiences and like us kind of like putting a lot of weight on those and the importance of that, but also on the other side of thing, like the ability to take the brighter moments and let them stick with us. Like that's something that we are less and less good at doing as we are more involved in the social media world. Like, we could do something that goes absolutely ballistic that people love and are insanely just, supportive of. The next day we might still feel absolutely just down in the dumps, sad, like, why do I feel so crappy? It's because we can't hold on to these feelings anymore because we need this constant resupply of serotonin or whatever the numbers give us just constantly. And I think the social media companies know this, they exploit it to no end. They'll keep exploiting it until we find another way of that self-validation, which I'm starting to feel like only really occurs with, personal interaction with people, spending more time with the people that you love and putting a lot more weight into the interactions that you have to like find ways of being more kind to the people that you love and to like allow them to be more kind to you. And, again, it's like you could make something gorgeous and your mother or your partner, sister, brother say like, wow, that's amazing, I love this, you're so talented. And you're like, oh, okay, whatever. And you just like wait for a complete stranger to validate it, to be like, oh, I need that. That's what I need, is somebody who has nothing to do with my life, who I'll never meet, to like, even if it's a celebrity that doesn't care about me, like I need that validation rather than somebody who I absolutely trust and care about. And to like rewind, notice that that's happening, bring ourselves into a place where we're like, wow, this is somebody who I really, I am impressed with their, status. I respect their opinions. Why don't I, take in what they're saying and use that as my validation? And everything that comes after that is just a bonus, or, we'll find ways of dealing with it. But as long as that exists, I think I'm hoping to become better at taking in the good stuff and finding it in other places outside of social media. But it's really hard. I gotta say, it's super hard.
Yeah, totally. And I think that what you said is so important. Like we need to find like healthier ways to validate our work. I feel that, or as a general rule, I have this rule that, the farther away the person who is giving feedback is, the less you need to be paying attention to that feedback, right? So what you said before about like, family and friends and peers giving you feedback, this can be so much more important, right? Because they, art is not just the art, it's just the person who creates the art, where the person is coming from, or where they are coming from with their work, like their stories, their journey. And I think that the people who are around you, the people who is closer to you, can understand all of this, and they can see your work as a whole and not just like a pretty picture on Instagram, right? So I think as a general rule, it makes a lot of sense to think or to try to find circles where you can really relate to that person and you can really get to know that person who is giving you feedback. And when it comes to social media, understand that it's just a pool of people that don't really know you, don't really know why are you creating the work that you're creating. I once read an article about a curator, an art curator, that said that everyone has an opinion about art and like they think that they know about art. And what she was saying actually is that, a pretty picture or an art piece is not just the art piece, it's the art history that is behind it, is the story of the person who created it, is the the journey that person made. So there's a lot of aspects that have to do with creating something that is not just posting a picture on social media, but it's just the story of that specific artist, right? So to answer to Vera, look for more personal ways of validating your work. I know that social media is omnipresent, and we are on social media. We are all on social media, but perhaps there's places where you can really connect with the person or really connect with the people who is actually giving you feedback, and this will this will feel more personal. And I think something that you said, Nim, that take these lighter moments and let them stick with you. I think that's so important to also kind of enjoy getting that validation for a long time and not just getting to the next thing at the next day, right?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to do if you're not used to doing it already. And I mean, I think our bodies, our psyches are not attuned to that. We're more attuned to remembering the bad stuff, because that will teach us lessons on how to survive, etc. I'm sure you can remember the worst thing that's happened in the last 20 years, or the most pain you've ever been. But it's a lot harder to focus in on the joys that you felt, and to relive those joys as easily as we can relive the pain and suffering that we've been through. And if anybody knows the secret to grasping onto those joyful moments, again, bring them to me. I will welcome them.
But I thought you knew. That's why I invited you to the podcast.
Oh yeah, I do have the secret. But for $19.99, you can subscribe to my podcast, and for $3.99 a minute, I can talk to you on the phone and develop those secrets with you and share some of those transcendental secrets. So
amazing!
Yeah,
I will do that.
I
will add it to the show notes for everyone who wants to subscribe. So
just put on the graphic.
Yeah, so we are moving on to our Better Now segment, where we share something that we are happy about or something that has impacted our lives lately. So Nim, what would you like to share? Something that you're currently happy about, or some win of yours or some project that you're working on, whatever it is.
I am happy to be in the circle of friends that are creating things that are very fascinating to me. I have a lot of musician friends that have really been working hard during pandemic times to know audiences, essentially. I mean, if you think designing is hard during pandemic, try being a musician whose like life is about touring and creating that type of audience. I just want to list off a few. A friend of mine named Sun Little, a friend of mine named Charlie Rabbitoe, another friend, Britton Ashford, another friend, Megan Livingston. These folks, I'm just like constantly inspired by their work and their perseverance and their the passion that they put into making beautiful things, which I can then take in and eat in the form of music. But those, to me, when I see people that I know doing amazing things, it makes me vicariously live my life through them and be like, wow, this is how I hope to be creative one day.
Oh, I love that. I will give them a shout out on our show notes so that everyone can go listen to their music. I'm personally excited, and I want to share that, Nim, that I teach and I offer workshops, and I have been doing this for the past years. I recently asked my private newsletter and my followers on social media what would they like to learn from me. And the big majority said that they would like me to teach how to add decoration and flourishing to their lettering. So, and it's crazy because this topic came out today and, one of the questions. So this is something I realize also that I never really offer a workshop around this, and my work is highly decorative and I never really offer a workshop about this. So I have so much to share. So this workshop is happening in a couple of weeks from now, and it's going to be online. So you will be able to join from wherever you are in the world. So you can sign up for the workshop on martinaflor.com/stunning lettering. I repeat, martinaflor.com/stunning lettering. I will add this to the show notes. I can only take as much people into the workshop, so you should save your spot soon. Nim, I would invite you to the workshop, but you're a freaking genius at adding decoration to your lettering, and you will make me look very small if you're in the room. So please don't sign up to the workshop, Nim.
I will make a fool out of myself just for you.
Amazing. So, Nim, so this is the end of our show. It was so great to have you. So fun. And where can people find you? Give us your information.
So I'll be under my bed for a good 3-4 days after this because I have high social anxiety and need to regroup after having conversations. So under my bed, which is down the hall that way, if you hear me whimpering, but if I've come out of there, you can find me on social media, on Instagram. Where you'll see me posting all sorts of things against Instagram, and then also self-deprecating stuff. Nim_BR is where you can find me there. Also make videos with my friends behind me here, the Cardboard Baby. That's also on Instagram. Hopefully soon there will be some new videos featuring these idiots and this idiot too. And I have a website, nimbenreuven.com. That's not as fun as the other things, but for professional purposes, that's where I list all of my cryptocurrency seminars that I give.
Amazing.
Not really.
So, Nim, it was great to have you. Any last words that you want to say to our audience besides inviting them to your cryptocurrency workshop?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Martina, for having me here. You're always a wonderful person to talk with and a very talented person that also gives a lot of inspiration. So thank you for having me on your show. I hope that I was at least not as evil sounding as Scott Biersack. But it's hard. It's hard to be as evil as him.
Yeah.
Just kidding, Scott. I love you. At the end of the day, if you're listening to this podcast, everything that I say, take it or leave it. Take it with a grain of salt. I am just an artist/designer. If you're looking for life advice, look to people with a lot more life experience than designers or lettering artists, such as myself. Keep your eyes peeled to the rest of the world and explore as much as you can. And I'll do the same. I'll be there. I'll be right there with you exploring.
Amazing. I love that. So this is it. For all of you watching on YouTube, for all of you listening on your favorite podcast app, you can find me, the host of this show, on social networks as well, at Martina Flor on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I will add Nim's contact handles on social networks to the show notes and everything he has shared today with you. I will also add his cryptocurrency workshops so that you can sign up for those workshops as well. If you have a question or comments, go to martinaflor.com/podcast, where you can see previous episodes, find show notes, and send voice memos with your comments and questions. You can also watch these episodes on YouTube. Just go to martinaflor.com/YouTube to find them. You can, of course, listen to these episodes on your favorite podcast platform. This is it for today. If you love this episode, subscribe to this podcast. And if you leave us a review, it will help others find us. Thank you all for listening, and see you on the next episode of Letter Now. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.
This podcast is awesome.